Welcome to Classical Etc., a show that dives into the philosophy, culture, and heart of classical education. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
Okay, so we've talked about two of the core ideas at Memoria Press, that we are classical and that we are traditional. And we're talking about a third core idea. Is when anyone talks about Memoria Press, they say that we're classical, traditional, and Christian. So I want to come back around to why that's a core idea, but I think I actually want to start a little bit more academic than that. So maybe, Martin, you can speak to this. A lot of people, when they talk about classical education and Christianity, they'll throw out this phrase: theology is the queen of the sciences. A phrase that is almost unintelligible to most people today. Can you explain what that means, that theology is the queen of the sciences?
Well, I just so happen to have been reading The Idea of a University by John Henry Newman, which is one of the great books on education, written by a Christian. And he talks about this in one chapter, and I just happened to have read yesterday. You didn't even know that. And he makes the point that, what is theology's role in education, the arts and the sciences? And he basically says, look, this affects everything. Your belief in the ultimate thing will affect every particular thing. And if you take it out, then nothing can be viewed rightly. And of course, it's interesting, we say queen of the science. Why not the king of the science? Yeah. And because really, in a way, the king of the sciences is philosophy, because philosophy is just the science of sciences. Science meaning a body of knowledge. It's the body of knowledge about all bodies of knowledge and how they interrelate to each other. And yet it is the handmaid. We say it's the handmaid of theology. It's the tool by which theology looks at everything, because theology is an all-encompassing thing. It's a very general thing as opposed to particular subjects, which are aimed at certain particular aspects of reality. So in that sense, in the sense that it's so universal, I think that's why it's called the queen of the sciences, because it's one of the sciences, philosophy being the other, which is the tool of theology, which wants to view everything, not just some particular thing.
I like the queen instead of the king.
I'm sure you do.
Because it sounds nurturing.
No, that's right.
The way it nurtures the rest of the bodies of knowledge,
yes,
which is the way you're using the word science in that older way.
Yeah. And I like what you pointed out about it sort of being pervasive, right? Because if we believe God created the world, then everything that we learn about the world, and in some ways speaking to us of God. In that sense, theology has to be pervasive, right? And so what we learn in other sciences has to speak to us of what we know about God, and therefore theology.
So Martin, though, when you describe it that way, it sounds to me like you're talking about what other people would talk about as a Christian worldview, the way that Christianity is pervasive. But I feel like you're on record saying you don't really love that terminology.
Well, and I've cooked up a better term, actually, than worldview. Because worldview, the reason, just a little background, the reason I've kind of contested that a little bit is because it sounds so subjectivist. It sounds like, well, you have your worldview and I have my worldview, and it's just your own kind of subjective view of everything. Whereas I think if we used a term like, what's your cosmology? What is your view of the cosmos being everything that is physical and metaphysical? What's your cosmology? And it has less of that.
I mean, like astrology.
I did not expect
I think it's the first time you've tried that term out.
Publicly. Yes.
We should keep working. Let's keep workshopping it.
Yeah. No, but it doesn't have that subjective view. And yeah, so I think that theology actually is a little bit better term, although that has its own problems, because theology also has this very sort of particularist sense to it. You have your theology, and there's a lot of theologies depending on which church you're in and all that. But yeah, I think it does have that sense much more than worldview does.
Sure. When we talk about theology as the queen of the sciences, we're usually talking about theology in terms of any kind of formulation of doctrine about God, instead of theology proper, which would be like just speaking about the nature of God himself. Yeah. Do you, Paul, agree with Martin's critique of this idea of Christian worldview, or do you think that we could redeem that term and use it to describe our schools?
I personally agree with Martin.
Okay.
It's one of the few instances that I would agree with,
he will
probably
admit
without
to.
qualification. And some of that is just personal subjective feeling when I hear that term, and I don't know why I have those connotations. But I don't like the word, but it's less more than not liking the word. It's more, I feel maybe it's because I feel like it pigeonholes me into a certain way of, I guess, thinking more broadly of philosophy, theology, the liberal arts and the sciences more broadly. I feel like it gives me an expanse that worldview doesn't give me. I don't know if that.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I think that the term, being coined at a point in philosophical history when people were starting to describe their subjective experience of the world, like kind of gives it that connotation, like you're saying, where I think in our education, what we're trying to do is teach children how to view the world as it actually is, which I think is why you use the word cosmology.
Yeah, right. Because the word originates in Immanuel Kant's book, Critique of Judgment. And then what's more bothersome than that, and that's not terribly bothersome, but then Nietzsche picks it up, and Nietzsche uses that word. Sure. And I think it gets a promiscuous feeling to it, but just by virtue of the fact that Nietzsche used it so much, and there were so many problems with him. But yeah, and part of the problem with the whole worldview as it sort of stands right now, the people who use that word will often describe it. If you say, well, what's a worldview? And they'll say, well, and they'll just give you these lists of beliefs that they like. Well, it's not the beliefs that you have. It's those really fundamental assumptions behind all your beliefs. That's what a worldview is. It's a really fundamental things, not just a list of all the things you believe. And so I think some of the discussions of worldview are a little, quite frankly, a little lightweight because of that.
So Tanya, dare I say it, the Memoria Press curriculum and Highlands Latin School, we're not trying to educate students so that they have a Christian worldview. But Christianity is a central idea. That's why it's one of these three topics. How is that the case in our curriculum and in our schools?
Well, we believe that it is central to everything, and that our goal in educating children is so that we can equip them best to fulfill the purpose that God has for their lives. And so in order to do that, we do definitely have to teach from a Christian perspective, because we believe that in the truth, goodness, and beauty, that T for truth is capital. That truth is Christian in nature. And so to have a real education that is going to take children through their lives, it is going to have to be Christian, because we were created by God for a purpose. And so we've got to be able to figure out what that purpose is and give the students the tools that they need to best serve. And that's the whole, our three things: classical, traditional, and Christian. Really, to me, that's a little bit like Christian to me is all of those, is in all of those.
Right.
And so, a traditional classroom is helping us put order and into their lives and structure and teach them to be respectful of others, character development. All of that is Christian. And classical is so that they can think best, and so that they've read wisdom and are garnering it themselves. And all of that is also Christian. So maybe those three tenets, I feel like Christianity is part of all of them, whereas classical is not necessarily part of traditional. Or
well, I mean, the relationships between those are interesting. But I do notice that sometimes I'll see the expression in mottos and this sort of thing, and they'll say classical and Christian. And I balk at that a little bit, simply because if you go back to what was called classical education before the 1920s in this country, it was Christian. classical education included everything, and included writings of the ancients. It included writing of the theologians. It included, all the Christian writings in that body of work. You said classical, you meant all that. So you didn't really have to add the term Christian. So sometimes that looks to me like it's being stuck together when one really already includes the other. So it's a kind of a different angle in what you were talking about.
And it speaks to the fact that when we talk about studying classical cultures, we always tag on that third culture people don't always talk about, which is the culture of the Hebrews, that when the insights of the Hebrew culture were adopted by the Roman Empire and then propagated throughout the Middle Ages, became the robust tradition of Christian history that we are still existing within today.
Right. Well, what Christian culture was the culture of Athens and the Hebrews and Jerusalem, Athens and Jerusalem. So when I say Christian now in this particular time, living downstream of the how the Christian church took those two traditions together, worked through them because they wanted truth, even if it was provided through God's general revelation through the Greeks, in addition to the special direct revelation that the Hebrews received. That was all worked out in the early centuries by the Cappadocian Fathers, by Augustine. And so what we have now is a sort of a consummation of both those things. So when you say Christian now, that's kind of what you mean.
So my point in bringing up the term Christian worldview was to kind of show, I think, that a way that term kind of is used in almost a small way. When we are at Memoria Press are trying to use the word Christian in a big way, to talk about everything, to talk about all of our education. And
as I was going to say, I get the question sometimes, well, so do you have a worldview program? And I say, yes. And they said, what is it? I said, our entire curriculum. Yeah. I mean, it's not, you don't separate that out and here's the worldview part of it. It's integrated in everything that we do.
So dovetailing on that, Paul, I want to ask you, can you think of examples in specific subjects where we put that to flesh, where it actually is all encompassing this Christian body of knowledge that we are passing on to our students? Well,
one of the moments that comes to mind is actually in Famous Men of Rome, which is, I think, a program where sometimes we get critiques because there's not enough Christianity in there, right? But the one that comes to mind is where we bring up, right, when Augustus is emperor, that the Bible talks about Jesus coming at the fullness of time. So let's talk about what that means. And this is in Roman history class, right? So in the context of that, so it's not something that gets isolated into a Bible program of, this is what's going on. But when we're studying Roman history, or when we look at, we spend a year studying insects, right? If you're looking at something, if you're looking for something that's beautiful, I don't fully, I wouldn't go on record saying that insects are beautiful, even though I do love the dung beetles in my pasture. But they are, but we spend a whole year on that. Why? Because again, that speaks to us of, even though we can't see the beauty of those things, right, and their function and why they're part of the cosmos at all, cosmology, right? But because God created them, they're worth studying, right? And they're worth stewing in. And so, I think in the insects program, we have, there are references to Christianity here or there, but it's the very fact that we're and that's why it's hard to come up with specific examples, I think, off the top of my head. I'm sure I could find some if you prep me with that question. But that's the whole thrust of the program, right? This is we're approaching this from a perspective of, we're not just trying to get you to pass a standardized test, right? But this is worth studying because it's part of our world, right? And it's worth doing it.
Right, and just slapping Bible verses in there does not make it more magnificent than it already is. Right. Math, science, nature, all these things, the expressions of truth in the literature, they're their own revelation. They don't need you slapping Bible verses on it. Just appreciate it for what it is. It's God's work just like everything else. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, too, I think there's some subtle kind of philosophical differences between the Christian who's looking at nature and maybe a non-Christian who's looking at nature. And there's a really good example in Dr. Bloom's intro to Nature's Beautiful Order, where he says that in his book, that book that we study, instead of trying to break everything down and focusing so much on the lung function of deer and this minute aspect of this animal, this book studies the animal that was made beautiful in that God created uniquely and saw was good. And I think that's kind of a subtle Christian way of teaching science that isn't just slapping a Bible verse on it, but it's distinctly Christian.
Yeah, he makes that point again and again that our tendency is to start with the minutest possible particle of something, when in fact that's nice, that's part of the animal, but there's something the actual animality of the thing is something over and above the parts. The whole is greater than the parts in any organic living thing, and we need to the purpose of our program is to have our students behold the wonder of the whole things in nature. That's the primary thing. Now you can go on and start breaking them apart and looking at the pieces, but first and foremost, we need to behold the thing itself.
Yeah. So Tanya, we do also study the Bible itself too, on top of all of these other topics, and I think we take a unique but really good approach to it. Would you explain it? And when you were teaching sixth grade, did you find it was effective? Because you were teaching that Christian Studies 4, the end of the road in a lot of ways.
Right. So yeah, I would love to talk about the curriculum. So in K to 2, we read through the Bible chronologically using the Children's Story Bible. Very simple stories, beautiful illustrations. And so that just gives the young students an introduction, but they're doing it chronologically all the way through for 3 years. And then in 3rd through 5th, we do it again using the Golden Children's Bible. But at that point, we have a study guide, and we're literally studying those characters and those events and those places, and really just trying to put a map of all of that in students' heads without teaching any doctrine. Just these are the stories. This is God's creation. These are his people. And this is his story leading up to 5th grade, when we study Jesus for most of the year, with at the end are a few lessons on the early church, but it really is mostly the Gospels. So then in 6th grade, we're overviewing the entire thing for the 3rd time. They're doing it in a year. And at that point, we really are trying to solidify the main facts of the stories, where they are, so that students, when they want to look something up in the Bible, they have a general idea of where it happened. And so that is also the first time that we in the classrooms have an actual adult Bible, not the Golden Children's Bible. And the interesting thing for me when I taught was to see how fluent the students got in flipping through that Bible. Sure. Because at first, it was really difficult for them to find any book of the Bible, even though they knew them and could rattle them off. It's just, there's a skill in that. But by the end of the year, they were really fluent with it. So it just makes it comfortable for them. But then after that, we go into early church history and a survey of Christianity. But we really do spend those foundational years nailing what's in the Bible and where it is, who the main characters are, what the major events are. And when you do it chronologically like that, you literally are seeing from the creation of the world all the way up to Jesus and why he had to come. Yeah. And so it really is beautiful going all the way through all those years. And I think the other main big thing that we do to tie it all together is the timeline program. Because all those Christian studies dates, then when the students see them alongside the Roman history and Greek history dates, it gives some context. Sure. To it for them. So that is the tie, I think, all the way through history. Even though, our teachers are teaching from a Christian perspective, I won't say a Christian worldview. They're teaching from a cosmological perspective.
There you go.
Oh my gosh.
Keep saying it.
And do you have a crystal ball up here? And then and the books are written, all of our study guides for all the subjects were written by Christian people. So everything is, even though we don't have necessarily blatant Bible verses scattered throughout our curriculum, it's there.
Right. And Shane, I think one of the questions you asked Tanya was, did she find the curriculum effective.
Yeah.
And I can say when I was teaching 7th and 8th grades, the first year I came to Highlands, I just assumed students knew. I don't think I knew what they had done in the prior years, but I just assumed they would know it, and they did. So I could be teaching the Iliad and reference whether it was an obscure story or a well-known story in the Bible, and they knew exactly what I was talking about, which was very helpful. And and then we went in and read the letters from the early church fathers, and they knew what had happened through the story of the chosen people, through the coming of Christ and the book of Acts. And so it was just kind of like picking up and continuing on. And so I would absolutely say it was effective.
Yeah. Mrs. Lowe made the point, I've read, that one of her kind of passions in making the Christian studies curriculum was that a lot of schools that are Christian don't treat the study of the Bible with the same rigor that they treat other subjects. And she felt like that dishonored the Bible. And I agree. I mean, it's something to be mined for all it's worth and to be put into your mind for your life.
That was that was a really big point that she constantly made, was that Christian studies gets the same kind of academic rigor as every other class.
Yeah.
It's not a Bible study. This is an academic course.
Yeah.
And we have a responsibility to make sure that our students know as much about their Christian lives as possible.
Yeah, and it wasn't topical. At my church, I was always fighting the battle of, getting a program in the Sunday school that actually taught the basic, because they all assumed that the kids had the basics. No, they didn't. That's what you needed to be doing in Sunday school. And so, having a program that is systematic and rigorous and not topical, not just topic hopping from one thing to another, and never having any, cumulative, consistent knowledge of it. And that's what Cheryl was always concerned about.
Now, we still use the King James Version in all of our classes. Martin, why is that?
Well, of course, I've written about this. I think that that part of the, I have an issue with a lot of modern translations of the Bible, and I'm not alone in this in the church, I think. But we have these modern Bible translations, and they're supposed to be up to date and more like today's language, and they're not very well, just in terms of the English, they're not very well written. I mean, it's great to have, Greek scholars in your translation team, and it's great to have Hebrew scholars in your translation team. Experts in Greek and Hebrew, that's great. You also need experts in English. And you go back to the King James Bible and you see that those translators, all of whom were thoroughly classically educated. They were familiar with all great literature. They were familiar with the Bible. They knew Greek and Hebrew, but they were trained also in English. Yeah. And it literally, whatever you think of it, it is the greatest work in English. Now, whatever you think about accuracy and all that, if you want accuracy, a newer translation is not going to help you. If you want accuracy, you got to go back to the original language, because every translation is, in a sense, a mistranslation, right? So that's not really the question. The question is, you got an English Bible here, and what kind of language is it written in? And it's written in a great high language, and that's intentional. A lot of people think that's the way they talked back. No, they didn't. Even in the time the King James Bible was written, it was considered high language because it had a grand subject.
So, Martin, let me ask you this. What was the role of Christianity in your homeschool when you were raising your boys?
Well, I think, when you're talking about education and the role of Christianity in it, you're talking about two things. One is the implicit things, and the other is the explicit things. Okay, implicitly, it's in everything that you use in your home school in terms of the assumptions that are behind it. And those are a little more difficult to ferret out, but you can do it. And there's also the explicit aspect of it. I mean, I remember, one of the things I remember the most about homeschooling, most of which my wife did, is I would walk by a room and she would read a story Bible, either later on the Golden Children's Bible. She would be in there just reading it to them. And so she would be sitting on the couch, and she'd have, a little boy on the right hand, twirling at her hair, and another one on her lap, and another one on the floor coloring a book or something. And she would just read it to them, just out loud. which brings in another aspect of things that maybe we can talk about sometimes, the whole benefit of reading aloud. But she would read it aloud to them, and then, they would have some kind of program later on in a different room maybe that's actually doing Bible study like our program does, although that program wasn't out yet at that time. But I think, just it needs to be behind all the subjects we teach, implicit in them. We need to study it explicitly, both by having them study it and by having us read the Bible out loud in words to them.
Yeah. Tanya, what about you?
I did the same thing that Martin did, only Cheryl Lowe was really in charge of what we were doing because my kids were in her 1 day a week cottage school. And so we were using Intro to Classical Studies, which had they were going through the entire Golden Children's Bible every year for 3 years, which was just a lot. But my husband's a minister too. So my kids would probably say that they were in church all the time because it was part of their schoolwork and they're, just a huge part of their lives. But I feel like they knew a lot. I know that they knew a lot more in church than the other children. I do think that's a failure in our churches today, is that we aren't teaching those things in an academic way that are central to who we are, that students don't know anymore. They don't know what's in the Bible or where it is or how it's all connected. So I do feel I'm very thankful for that academic role that Christian studies took in their lives that I think complemented very well our church lives.
Yeah. So Paul, you're the resident example of a classically educated student. And your connection to Christianity in classical education was probably more profound than most. So,
well, I mean, I was thinking more of my early elementary when I was homeschooled, which is very interesting because I was sitting here thinking about it and thinking, well, there was no divorce between our faith and what we studied, right? So it was a 5-minute walk to the church, and so we'd find ourselves at the church throughout the week as well, not just on Sundays. We had there was another family that homeschooled too, and we would memorize the same Bible verses and go through that. But also, like, when we would study the Bible, it was, again, I think, like, reflecting back on this perspective of it gets the same academic rigor, I think in my mind just sort of cemented this is an inherent part of what it means to be educated. And so while by being involved in the church and all of that led me to a personal encounter with God, the academic side meant that my cosmology included
it's catching on.
Included Christianity to its core. Right. And later on, I remember being a child and going, wow, Mom's really passionate about this faith stuff, and later on, I found out that it was because she was coming back to her faith, because as she decided to homeschool, she said, well, I have to teach them the faith. And so she was rediscovering it as she taught it, which for her, has completely changed her life insofar as, how she prioritized the faith in her life, which is amazing, right? And that was passed down to me as a passion because, she was rediscovering it. So one of the benefits even of giving your child this education is your own journey it's going to set you on.
Yeah.
How about you, Shane?
Yeah. So I went to a pretty standard private Christian school, which had a lot of good things about it. But one of the good things was that they took the Bible extremely seriously. And so from a very young age, the Bible was the most important book in my life. And to this day, I mean, I read the biblical or the original languages for fun because I just love the book itself. And they taught me that. And I think our curriculum, one of the reasons I resonate with it here and resonate with the program at Highlands Latin is because the book, the Bible, the bedrock of all that we believe is cherished and it's loved. And that's what I got from it. You hear a lot of classical Christian educators throw out this Latin word pietas, how does that relate to our Christian identity?
Well, pietas, it's piety, and I think it includes this idea of duty, right? And so it's your duty towards God, and I think that goes back to sort of what I was trying to express in my own upbringing was you had this academic side of learning the faith, right? But then there's also what's the working out of that in your life, right? And so God asks certain things of us. And so part of the education that I got when I was being homeschooled and later on in other private schools was not only do you have to know these things, but you have to do these things, right? And so it's character formation within the faith, right? So how are you these things, so therefore what is that demand of you, and putting your soul in order, if you will, in order to do those things that your state in life has of you.
And it's all through the curriculum, through the literature, through the famous men, just, mistakes that they've made. And we're just pointing it out all the time. Without it, it's not like we have religion class over here, and then over here we're going to have history, and they're two separate things. We do have a separate religion class, but we also have, it's everywhere. I don't know if we're expressing that it's part of everything because it's part of who we are. Right. So the character formation, that's a huge part of it. But why are we doing that? So that we can be better Christians. Right. So it feels like it's not separate in anything that we do. It's a part of who we are and everything that. I'm not expressing that well, but
you're saying
I feel like it's just it's the biggest point of what we're doing here.
Our tagline as a company is to inculcate virtue. And if one of those virtues is pietas, then it's a fundamentally Christian goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a classical virtue as well. The Greeks valued strength and intelligence. Those were their two values. The Romans valued order and piety. And piety just meant order of the soul. So in one sense, it's just ordering your soul rightly. Right. But in another sense, if you consider that the sort of the classical idea of the soul is the intellect, the will, and the affections, I think that's where piety comes in. You may know something. You may decide that there's certain things you need to do as a result of knowing that. But do you have a love for it? Do you have affection for it? And I don't know what a lot of people mean by the term piety, but that's what I mean by the term piety, is having an affection for the true.
I think also in this conversation, the thing to point out here is that our curriculum, books can only do so much. Mm. The culture that we live and breathe and we stew in and our kids stew in, that's bringing these things like pietas to the forefront, right? And that's an expectation that we have, and that we've tried as best as we can to put that in our books, but also that's something that the culture that you're going to stew in is going to determine for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there you have it. Memoria Press is classical, traditional, and Christian. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Classical Etc. If you'd like to show your support for the show, then you can leave a like below. If you'd like to add your voice to the conversation, then you can comment. And if you want to follow along with us on this journey, then please subscribe. Thanks, and I'll see you later.